Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is let's call it a Scott as a guest episode. So this is a recording of an interview that I gave on a different podcast. So a gentleman named Tom Pisello, if you're not familiar with Tom, he runs a podcast called Evolvers, the Evolvers podcast, from pitch to purpose. And he runs the Evolve Selling Institute. Tom was introduced to me and he asked me if I would join his podcast not too long ago. And we talked about a couple of really important topics that I wanted to share with you. So Tom gave me permission to go ahead and share that episode with you, because I think a lot of the topics and the different selling strategies that we talked about, I think are going to be relevant for you each and every day. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a preview, the first thing we spent a couple of minutes talking about is the linkage of ultra running, which I love to do, with running a startup and doing sales every single day. There's always lots of what I call lessons from the trail, as I'm out there on the trail running long miles and doing lots of training, getting ready for these long races and long events that I put myself through. I think there's lots and lots of great parallels and lessons that we can take from the trail and apply that to the sales process and to running a startup. From there, we talked about challenges in the marketplace right now in a post-COVID world where there's still some uncertainty. We talked about shifts in the selling environment and how the importance of paying attention to your internal economy and how that the external economy does not have to affect your internal economy, your mindset and your mind space. We also talked about changes and ways that you can think about measurement and sales forecasting. We talked about the importance of sorting versus selling in your prospecting and your outbound. And we also talked about some specific strategies around how you as a seller can do a better job keeping control of the sale and really identifying who's ready to take action versus people who are just tire kicking and just interested in seeing a demo. So those are just a few of the topics that we covered in my conversation with Tom Pisello. Really a lot of fun, always fun for me to get interviewed as opposed to doing the interviewing every once in a while. And I think lots of good lessons for you that I want to share. So that's it for now. Let's head over to my conversation with me.
My guest today is Scott Sambucci. He's a startup coach, speaker, podcaster, and best-selling author. His latest book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Scott is currently the Chief Sales Geek. Scott, I love that title, by the way. I've got title envy. I'm Chief Evangelist, but Chief Sales Geek sounds much better. Anyway, Chief Sales Geek at Sales Qualia. And that's a firm that's dedicated to helping early stage B2B startups ramp and scale up. And in this role, Scott leverages over 25 years of experience building and selling enterprise tech products as an executive for 2 publicly traded companies. And he also led 3 Silicon Valley startups, each to their first $1 million in revenue. And anyone who's done that knows that that's easier said than done. But even more impressive, outside of work, Scott is an Ironman, a long-distance swimmer, and get this, an 11-mile swim across Lake Tahoe and a 21-mile, don't want to lose that last mile on you, Scott, 21-mile ocean swim across the Catalina Channel. And he's also an ultra-marathoner. And you're the second ultra-marathoner I've had the honor to interview. That ultra-marathoner has finished 100-mile races, but it says here that you've completed a 200-mile race as well, which is just outstanding.
Yeah, 2 of them actually, but
oh my goodness. Yeah, welcome.
The same one twice.
Oh my goodness, a glutton for punishment. 1 200-mile run on the same course wasn't enough. Well, welcome, Scott. Thank you for joining us here in the Evolvers.
Happy to be here, man. I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we mentioned you're an endurance athlete. What lessons have you learned from the amount of training that you've done, the competition for these long ultra distance events? What have you learned that kind of helps you apply to startups, selling, and scaling revenue at these organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's probably a lot of different directions we can go with it. But the one place I always come back to for myself every time I'm running a race is that you've got to run your own race. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, like you're standing at the starting line and you can look around, and I had the same when I did an Alcatraz swim. And you get there and you look around, and you're like, okay, well, I'm probably faster than that person, or that woman, man, she must be like 65 years old and she's out here. And you get out there on the trail and you just don't know who people are and how fast they are. And so it's so easy to look around and say, well, geez, that person's just up ahead. Maybe I can catch that person. Or look around at the aid station at the other people and like, why am I back here with these people? And when you start doing that, it's that adage of comparison is the thief of joy. Like the whole joy of doing the startup is the journey itself. And when you're out there on the trail, if you're out there for 100 miles, it's 24 hours, 30 hours. If it's 200 miles, it's 3 days or more. And if you're spending the whole time looking around at other people and worrying about what they're doing and trying to compare yourself to where they are or how fast they are, or any of that, then you just lose the whole joy of that journey in the first place. So I always tell people, just run your own race. Like, don't worry about, oh, this company just raised this capital, or that company just hit $10 million, or they hired a VP of sales, so I should too. Do your own thing, run your own race.
Yeah, worry about your own customers, worry about your own journey, and don't get hung up on, well, you didn't raise that round or who they just closed as a customer. Be true to your business and your customers, and eventually you'll get there. And the other thing I would imagine is you don't get too hung up on the finish, right? Because it is such a long journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the mantras when you're out there is station to station, and relentless, the idea of relentless forward progress. My friend Kelly and I are both runners, and we have this mantra we just talked about, just keep moving forward, relentless forward progress, station to station. So usually the aid stations are anywhere from 5 miles to 20 miles apart. And if you're doing a 200-mile race and you're at the starting line, you're thinking about mile 200, it's just too big of a journey. You just say, okay, look, the next 3 miles are up this mountain, and then I got 4 miles of downhill, and I got the first aid station. And then from there, I can fill up my water and my nutrition and keep moving from there. And so if you just break down any big, journey like that into smaller parts, it's much more easier to manage. And getting to that station is important. But what's also important is getting out of that station, because as the race drags on, and you're getting tired,
harder to pick yourself up and lift yourself up to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of a sudden it's like it's 2 a.m. and it's 30 degrees and it's starting to snow and there's a fire and it's nice and warm and they have got soup and coffee, and you tell yourself like, man, like this is kind of nice here. I remember I was at the second time I did the Tahoe 200. It was mile 175, and I pulled into an aid station and I looked around and there was just a bunch of runners sitting in chairs around this fire. And my first thought was like, what are you doing? Like, this is a race. Like, yeah, you got to get here and fuel up, but you got to get out. Like, celebrate the success, take a moment, take a break, but then you got to keep going. Otherwise, you're never going to finish.
Awesome. Great advice. And I love how you mentioned that it's all about, that progress station to station and breaking it up into those, on the race course, there are these natural kind of milestones. But I would imagine in a startup, you can simulate that in the event and have those milestones. And do you celebrate when you reach those stations, or is it quick celebration and then, like you said, you kind of got to pick yourself up and go?
Yeah, it's a quick celebration. I mean, for me, I usually do a little personal reward for myself. Like I love peanut M&Ms, so I keep a packet of peanut M&Ms in my backpack or in my aid bag. And I tell myself when I get to the aid station, I'm going to reward myself with that bag of peanut M&Ms. And I have that bag. And then I go, cool. Like now, if I want to get the next bag of M&Ms, I got to get out of here and get to the next aid station 15 miles down the road.
Awesome.
So yeah, you definitely have to celebrate the progress. And that's one of the other things about, like, when you're going up a mountain, for example, like some of these climbs can be 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles long. You're climbing 3,000 feet. It takes a couple hours. I mean, we've all been hiking, right? How long does it take to get to the top of the mountain? And one of the things that you can do just to reward yourself is you get to a certain checkpoint, like maybe halfway up the mountain, or you see that rock where there's an opening down into the valley, you just stop and turn around and look down and realize, like, man, like I started way down there 2 hours ago, and yeah, I still got a lot of work to do, but man, I just did all that. And just like that little piece can be really useful if you're a startup. It could be, hey, we got our first customer, and yeah, they're maybe not paying us what we want them to pay, and maybe the product isn't built out the way we want to build it, and maybe it's not the ideal customer we had in mind. Dude, we got the first customer. We got somebody paying us money, right?
Something that some startups never achieve. Exactly. And it's good to pay attention to that view. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I have definitely gotten into that grind where you just, you keep looking up and you keep looking ahead and you never take that time to celebrate. So I think that that's really, really an important element and important advice that I know you give to your startups that you advise. So we're in a really uncertain environment now with COVID-19, and many of us are into the recovery phase. The shock phase is kind of worn off, and now we're thinking, okay, how has the landscape changed, and how do we kind of remaneuver? Talk about some of the biggest challenges you're hearing from the different sales leaders and organizations that you coach. What are they going through right now?
So I think, like you said, a lot of the start was shock and trying to figure out what happened, what happened out there and how do you adjust to that. And like the first adjustment that I think people have to make is to realize that the external economy doesn't have to be your personal economy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we did a couple weeks into the whole COVID situation. We just brought all of our clients together for a half-day workshop. We did a virtual online event, and we said, look, here's some things to think about. And one of the things you need to remember is the global economy is $80 trillion. There's $80 trillion of economic activity out there, more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So even if there's this 10% drop in global economic activity, there's still a lot of money floating around. And there's still people that have problems that need to be solved. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, because all of you are technology companies, you're probably in many cases the first company that's ever solved that problem using technology the way that you're using it. And so all of these companies out there, they still have the problems that you solve, and they probably need you now more than ever because the people that they were working with, many of them are no longer there. The processes that they might have been following are not the same processes they can use from work from home because they can't walk down the hall and ask Bob to sign his piece of paper or get approval from Sally, the CTO. So all of these people and processes have been completely taken away. And this is an opportunity for you to show now more than ever why your customers need to be thinking about using technology. And we're seeing that with digital transformation numbers across the board. There's lots of trend out there that shows that many of these corporations that have been thinking about these digital initiatives for years now are finally saying, like, we don't even have a choice. We have to do this digital transformation. And so just a lot of it's just, first of all, mindset and saying, look, we solve a problem, we solve an important problem. So let's go out there and sell. There's nothing wrong with selling as long as you're adding value to the customers.
Yeah, and it's almost like with digital transformation, someone poured kerosene on that fire. Organizations have just been forced to do it. A lot of our customers who used to sell with brochures or in-person meetings, and they're having to do it digitally now. And some of them were ready for it and some of them weren't. And it's really just accelerated all of their efforts in that area. Security is another area where the spending is going to be higher than it was before. And Pricewaterhouse had a good study recently on that to maybe share with your startup community about where the spending is cutting back and where it's accelerating. And, that leads me to my next question. Obviously you're giving that advice to the sales leaders. What have you seen the change being with customers, the buyer's point of view, and maybe how their perspective has changed because things are a lot more uncertain for them. And many of them have had their budgets slashed, resources cut, and many are operating under a spending freeze.
All right. We are off and running, you might say, in my conversation with Tom Pisello, or his conversation with me, however you want to think about it. I just want to say thanks for listening to the Startup Selling Show and being a listener and perhaps being a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber, make sure you do subscribe because that's how you're going to get fed more and more of these kinds of episodes. Not just me being interviewed, but me interviewing other people, as well as me just bringing you good stuff every single week in terms of content, replays of LinkedIn Lives and other webinars that I've done. Everything we do here in the Startup Selling Show is designed to help you ramp up and scale up your sales process. Speaking of which, if you're one of those people that are running a B2B tech startup and you're in that early stage, maybe you're seed funded, maybe you're coming up to an A round, or you just landed an A round trying to get to that next step and next stage in your growth, chances are there's some way that we might be able to help you out. I know it's a really big challenge getting out of that startup mode and into ramp up and into scale up mode. And that's what we do each and every day here at Sales Qualia with our clients just like you. So if you want to learn more about what we do, the best place to start is just go over to the website, salesqualia, Qualia.com. And if you want to learn more about how I think about sales from a very analytical and very framework, process-oriented way, you can download a copy of my book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Right there at the homepage, you can download a full and complete copy, a free copy, your personal copy of the book, and we'll email it to you directly as soon as you click on that link and tell us where to send it. So that's it for now. Let's head back over to my conversation with Tom Pisello on the eVolvers podcast?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely some tight budgets out there, but one of the things we always go back to is what's the problem you're solving,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're in a position where the problem you're solving wasn't a core issue, wasn't one with urgency, wasn't a fundamental business challenge, and you're feeling like, well, this was a nice to have instead of a gotta have, well, maybe that's an opportunity for you to learn something about the product that you built and the market that you serve.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, if you're solving a big enough problem, there's money out there. So a couple of examples, like we work with companies across a number of different sectors, retail being one of them, industry is getting hammered, healthcare industry is getting hammered,
Mm-hmm.
education industry getting hammered, manufacturing industry getting hammered. We have clients in all four of those sectors. All four of those clients have reported to us that they have converted new customers in the last 5 weeks.
Wow, that's
so
awesome.
As an example, like to your last point about selling digitally, one of the clients that we work with is they have a hardware device that does patient monitoring, and they had been selling to outpatient surgery centers. So if you need to get a non-urgent surgery, something small, skin graft, those sorts of things, there's these surgery centers all over the place, and they have this monitoring device that's sold there. Well, all of those surgery centers shut down. And so the founder and I sat down and said, okay, what are we going to do now? And I said, well, the problem you can solve is patient monitoring for COVID patients.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's obviously a problem that needs to be solved. So how do we get an audience? Because we've never sold to big healthcare companies. We've never sold to governments before. We've only sold to these private outpatient clinics. And so the first thing we did is he put together what we call a vision demo, where he rented a hotel room, and he had a friend of his from college who was a videographer, and they did a 15-minute how-to video where they could take their hardware device and in less than 15 minutes turn a hotel room into a hospital room.
Wow.
Using their device. And so we created this vision demo and immediately started calling, emailing, LinkedIn messaging everybody at different state level, federal level, as well as healthcare institutions, and just saying, we want to help, we can help this situation. And within 3 weeks, he signed 2 new clients, one in Texas and one in California, and a third actually in India, where they now have thousands of COVID positive patients that are getting monitored in real time using their device. So within weeks, doing a pivot based on digital selling, solving today's problem, and showing how that device is going to help the situation. And then otherwise, they would have been basically ready to pack it up. There's no outpatient, there's nobody to buy our stuff. So being creative and looking for the problem to solve and being additive to this as a solution, there's always money for that.
Yeah. So make sure there's urgency around that problem and the challenge that they have to solve it today. And if there's not, as you said, smartly analyze it and potentially pivot. So when we look at the new environment and sales processes, one of the things is, are you seeing changes in the overall sales process? I know forecasting is very, very difficult in this environment. I know sales processes are going to be, certain stages are going to be elongated. They're going to change. And most importantly, are you seeing issues with the path from kind of do nothing to yes that a lot of sellers have to get through?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so the way we think about this is when you kind of go through this selling process, a lot of times when you're thinking of, say, take a sales forecast, right? A lot of times we might monitor things like, how many discovery calls have we done? How many demos? How many deals are in demo stage? How many deals are in proposal stage? And in the sort of old world, you can, in a lot of ways, especially now, even fudge those numbers. Right? There's some good data to show that calls are actually increasing, call pickups and call time is increasing. People are responding to more emails. Companies are spending more time doing demos. And so you can end up with this false sense of security in your sales pipeline that, hey, look, we're doing lots of demos. We must be doing well. We have lots of proposals. We must be doing well. But what we don't know necessarily is, are those just vanity activities that people on the other side need to look busy, right? And so one of the things that we do when we think about the sales forecast is thinking about what are the new metrics we should be measuring that are more indicative of actual buying activity as opposed to looking activity. So as an example of this, I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. So on the front end of the sales funnel, You think about we talk about like an SDR, sales development rep, looking
Mm-hmm.
for engagement. One of the things we measure is what we call two volleys. So I send you an email, you reply back. I reply to you, you reply back again. That's a measure of true engagement because there's actually a conversation that started.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that you can start to monitor to see whether or not somebody just replying to an email or is there a conversation getting started. It's one example. Demos, second example. Instead of just looking at how many demos have I done, what if we measured who are the people that are in that product demo based on the titles? Because if we know that the CTO and the head of operations both need to be involved with the purchasing decision, but they're not in our product demos, then we could be doing a bunch of demos, but to the wrong people.
Mm-hmm.
So as part of a sales forecast, I might go to my sales rep and say, look, instead of measuring demos, I want you to tell me, like map out for each account, how many of the buyer types do we have an economic buyer, a technical buyer, a user buyer, a product champion involved with each demo? If you can check those 4 boxes, now we can count that as a real demo.
Yep.
So it's just peeling back the traditional metrics and thinking about what's the true buyer activity. And frankly, we should have been doing this anyway. It just becomes a lot more severe and intensified when you realize like, wow, deals aren't closing.
Yeah,
this is a real
exactly.
opportunity, I think, for sales leaders to adjust how they're thinking about measurement and forecasting.
Yeah, one of the other things that we put in place is, making sure that business cases are developed, financial justifications provided, that has been consumed, that was shared with the right people within the organization, so that there's that economic justification. And that's one of our added gates that we put in to know whether a deal was kind of getting there or not. I love the demo, making sure the right people are engaged, especially in this environment. The folks that you're working with, one of them might be let go. And if they were the champion and maybe one other person was involved, that deal's going to go nowhere. But if you get high enough in the organization where the pain is severe enough, it can definitely move forward. And we're definitely seeing what you're saying, which is this distortion where there seems to be a lot of activity and maybe even more top of funnel than ever before. But the close ratio is definitely declined as sellers run into those, the budget freezes and the embargoes on spending and the lack of resources to kind of take it over the finish line. I think there's a lot more vetting that has to go on. And Scott, you've given just some great advice on some extra things to look at. Now, I know one of the big things that you're a proponent of, and I love this focus, is proper sales qualification. Talk about why that's more important than ever and something that you call the 5 Ps.
Yeah, and I'll try to do my best to go through that framework with an auditory explanation.
Yeah, rather than a slide deck. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
sorry to put you on the spot.
I usually no, that's okay. I usually like to draw stuff out of my iPad if I'm doing a workshop or a online course or something. But so when you think about deal qualification, like a lot of times you think about qualification, it starts with lead qualification. Somebody comes into the funnel, we have a conversation, we do some discovery. Okay, do they have, using a traditional model, say BANT, do they have budget authority, need timing? I mean, if the answer is yes, then like, great, check the box, this lead is qualified. From there, we enter that sales process. We put them into demo, we put them into that sort of pipeline or sales pipeline, so to speak. And so right now, especially selling B2B or enterprise, you've got a lot of deals. I mean, we're only a couple months into the COVID world, and you could easily have deals that you sourced back in Q4 or in the early part of Q1 that are in your sales pipeline right now. And it's easy to say, well, I qualified them before, so now I'm just going to like push them through the pipeline, right? And what we need to do is look at not lead qualification as a one-time event, but it's actually an all-the-time event. And so when we think about deal qualification, we're looking at re-qualifying every deal on a weekly or semi-monthly basis and saying that these different P's that you just talked about, Tom. So one is, the first P is problem. Does the problem that we solve still exist at that company? Or has the problem disappeared? Or do they even perceive that there's a problem anymore?
Number two, what is the perception? And kind of pushed down.
Yeah. Like what's the priority here of it? Which is the second P, right? Where do they prioritize this problem? Right. And you can think of from your own personal standpoint. every day there's stuff to do around the house. So which is the important stuff? Making dinner, getting the kids to bed versus, okay, the house is a little messy. I guess I'll get to it tomorrow. It's just the way we all work, right?
Yeah.
The third is then the perception. How big is that problem for them? And it's related to priority, right? Because they could have a big problem that's not the priority right now versus a big problem that they are making the priority. So is the problem a small little dot, or is it this big, massive boulder that they know that they need to move in order to make progress? So those are the first three. And then the next P's are what's the proximity of the person, the different buyer types. So we talked about it, okay, a CTO, a VP of operations, somebody who might be a direct line manager. How close are they to that problem? Because I might be a CTO and go, yeah, that's a big problem for the operations team, but I'm going to focus on this other stuff for now.
That's their problem.
Versus somebody who's dealing with it. Yeah, it's their problem. Or it's like, yeah, I know it's a problem, but we're just not going to spend time and resources on it. And then the last P is the perception, the perspective. How do they think they should solve that problem? Should they buy from a vendor? Should they build it themselves? Should they work with a consulting company? Should they do nothing? So sort of running through this rubric of these 4 or 5 Ps just allows you to re-qualify the deal, because to your point, maybe the head of operations that you were working with 6 weeks ago is no longer there, or the head of operations has now moved to another part of the business. And so now you've got to think about who are the people involved, and I need to go find a new champion. Or maybe the problem that was perceived to be big 3 months ago is now not perceived to be so big.
Yeah.
So just re-qualifying these deals on a regular basis is really critical to know whether or not that deal is still real or not.
Completely agree with that. And in a startup, it's essential. And many of us are under-resourced now coming through this, to where the reason we need to do this is resources are precious, and your sellers only have so much time to spend with each customer if they're spending it in the wrong places, where these 5 Ps, problem, priority, perception, proximity, and perspective, aren't all there. It's a waste of their time. Those deals won't close, right? And that's why I think it's so important.
Well, we just onboarded a new client this week, and part of that process is we were diagnosing, their situation. They're like, hey, we're doing 30, 40 demos a month. And we kind of went through it and said, okay, what's your conversion rate on those? And it was pretty low. Okay, how do the demos get booked? Well, they come to the website, book a demo. They can book a demo within 24 hours notice, and we do the demo. And I said, all right, I know what your problem is. You need to do fewer demos.
Yeah.
And
they're like, what?
CEO looked at me and was like, what? I was like, your problem is you're doing too many demos.
Yeah.
He's like, no, we want to do as many. No, you don't want to do as many demos as you want. The problem is you're doing a bunch of demos to people who aren't qualified, and you don't even know if they're in a position to buy. Are they just looking? Are they looking to stay busy? Are they interested in the technology, but maybe they're considering a competitor or consider solving the problem on their own? So you've got to go and do this lead qualification. And then even after you've done the demo, go back and requalify over and over. And so what if we could reduce the number of demos from 40 to 15, but increase your conversion rate by 60%? Now you're actually selling more deals in a lot less time. To your point, Tom, like the time is your most precious resource. If you're spending, time with 90% of the people that are never going to buy from you, then you've lost that time forever. And you're not spending time with the people who may be willing and able to buy from you.
Yeah. And the best sellers I've ever worked with at different startups, one of them's been with me for, she's been with me almost 30 years now. She's the best qualifier I've ever met. She knows how to smell out these 5 Ps like you wouldn't believe. So you mentioned also in your writing about a couple of other terms I found interesting, and I want to learn more about them. What the heck is a buyer vampire and a zombie?
Yeah, those are just metaphors for people that will suck the life out of you. Going back to lead qualification and deal qualification. We talk a lot about this in the book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. It's a whole chapter on this. And the notion is like, look, a lot of times the people that you're dealing with on the other side, they're not doing it maliciously. Like they think they're actually doing you a favor, and that they're booking demos and learning about your product and asking you for proposals that they can run up the flagpole, right? Or, hey, this looks really great. Send me a 1-pager. Or that looks good. Can you send me the deck so I can circulate it with the team? And on the surface, it feels like sales activity. We're getting somebody who wants our stuff and they say they're going to share it. But at the end of the day, it's typically that person who doesn't really have influence in the organization. So instead of relying on that person, to do the selling for us. It's our job as a seller to figure out, well, if you're going to share this deck, who are you going to share it with? If I'm going to show you a product demo, who else should be taking a look at this, like we talked about sooner or earlier in this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
So that vampire or that zombie is just somebody who you can spend lots and lots of time with, and all they're going to do is suck the life out of you. Because in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months down the road, you realize like, wow, there was never a deal here in the first place.
Yeah. And how much time have you wasted, other team members wasted that have come in and helped and assisted, and you'll never get that time back.
Yeah.
So again, I think
and that's where proposals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, that's why when people say, hey, I'm looking at my sales pipeline, I've got, 12 proposals out, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, how many times, and most people, think about this if you're listening, how many times do you send a proposal and when does that person get back to you? I always joke in our workshops, they get back to you on the 19th of never. Mm-hmm. As soon as you send that proposal, you've lost control of the sale. And how many times do you send a proposal and then they finally come back to you and go, oh, I checked with my boss and we decided, he said that it's not a priority right now, or she said we don't have budget, or she said come back to us in 2021, right? So you've spent all that time. It could be months of that sales activity, demo after demo, call after call. You finally get to the proposal, what you think is like the proposal stage. The person you're talking to is like, oh, this looks great, send me a proposal. You send the proposal thinking you're close to the sale, and all you've done is gotten to a place of rejection.
And the whole thing there, Scott, is to ask more of the right questions, right? To make sure you're identifying these vampires and zombies.
Yeah, it's partially, of course, like qualifying that person and identifying like who else would you consult or who else would be typically involved with these kinds of decisions. But even further back in the sales process, and we see this a lot too, where as a company you might be out there doing your outbound, whether it's email or phone calls or LinkedIn, or you're doing your outbound prospecting, but you're only targeting, say, a mid-level manager. And a lot of times the trap that people fall into is like, well, those are the people that return our emails. So we're just going to market to those people because those are the people that want to get on a demo. Those are the people that will book a meeting and talk to us.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
so they get this single point of contact.
They're the folks that are doing that are comped or measured on those responses, right? So it kind of reinforces that bad behavior in a way.
Yeah, and so you go down this path that could go months of a couple calls, a couple demos, proposal, chasing, trying to follow up, and you realize, oh, wow, there's no sale here in the first place. So one of the best ways to solve for that problem is very early on, even when you're doing your outbound, is make sure you're mapping the organization. We just had a coaching call today with our group, and we talked about high-low selling. If you're going to do the outbound email campaign, some emails should go up to the VP level and some emails should go to the director level. And let's make sure that by the time that we get to that demo and we're trying to get that VP to join us for 30 minutes, they already know who we are. We're not relying on that single point of contact to do all the selling for us. Because frankly, selling our own stuff is hard. Why would we rely on some middle-level manager that doesn't have any political or social clout within the organization, especially with their boss, to be convincing? So it's our job early on to get as many buyers involved in the sales process, going all the way back to the start of the outreach, so that later on you've got some relationship, you've got some leverage, you've got some recognition from those buyers when you need 30 minutes of their time with a real decision maker.
And I think if you've got too low of an entree in that organization, getting any kind of priority out of today's tightened budgets is going to be more difficult than ever. So target high and low in your outreach, and then make sure you've got the right people involved through the qualification and through all of the stages, so you don't have that one point of contact. That's at least what I pulled out of there. Did I get that correct, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it.
Awesome. So what's the one piece of advice? I know we covered a lot of ground. We talked about the sales qualification and kind of getting the process right. What's the one piece of advice you'd like to leave the evolvers with today?
So I would finish with one of the things you mentioned at the very start of our conversation, where you referred to me as a chief sales geek, and people sometimes they ask me like, why chief sales geek? And the reason I started this company, Sales Quality, is because I realized that too many founders, especially people with technical backgrounds, whether they're engineers or product people, they didn't know that sales is just a process. The perception is like sales is this thing that you do to people, or it's some black box that only certain people in this world are skilled on how to do. And the reason I call myself a chief sales geek is because I think of myself almost like an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And every part of your sales process is just a piece of machinery. And so if you are really, really clear, if you know what that process should be and you can map it out and build your sales process, then it doesn't matter who you are, you're capable of running that sale. And it's easy to then get that process to be run by other people. So like my one piece of advice is just treat sales like a process, get control of it. Because if you don't have a process for selling, you're going to be at the mercy of the buyer's process for buying.
Love it. And being an engineer in training and then a serial entrepreneur much later, completely agree with that. I see it as a system. You've got inputs, you've got outputs, and
Absolutely.
There's a process that it goes through. And the numbers as well are telling usually in that process. And I think a lot can be inferred from that if you're looking and measuring the right numbers as part of the system.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I wrote the book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. The subtitle of the book is Ramp Up Your B2B Startups Repeatable Revenue with the Q Framework. And so I wrote the book because if you grab a copy of it, every chapter is a different part of your sales process that you can take and implement on your own. And so I wanted to demystify this notion like sales is something that's in a black box or only certain people can do it. If you just follow the book, you're going to be able to build version 1.0 of your own sales process.
Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Scott Sambucci, absolute pleasure to talk with you today. And the book is available on Amazon, I would expect.
It is even better. Go to Sales Qualia, my website, salesqualia, QUALIA.com. Right on the homepage, in the middle of the homepage, you can click a button and download an entire copy, PDF version of the book. When I wrote the book, I decided I didn't really care about royalties and selling a bunch of copies. What I cared about is getting this message out to as many people as possible. And so you can go buy a copy if you want a hard copy from Amazon or a Kindle version, read on your electronic device. But most importantly, go get a free copy on the website. And once you download it, you'll also get access to worksheets that accompany every single chapter. So treat it like almost like a textbook or a workbook. So as you're reading a chapter, print out the worksheet, fill out the worksheet, and every time you finish a chapter, you're going to be building another part of your sales process.
Awesome. And folks can reach out to you too as well, Scott, from the Sales Qualia site.
Absolutely. As soon as they grab a copy of the book, our marketing elves will let me know. We'll do a personal reach out, or you can also hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time.
Awesome. And we'll include, absolutely, and that's how we got in touch with each other. I will include your LinkedIn address as well as part of the description. Scott, great talking to you. Chief Sales Geek at Sales Qualia, Scott Sambucci, author of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. I know I did not download my copy yet, Scott, but it is part of my work over Memorial Day to study up on it. And I'll be hitting you up for more advice, I'm sure.
All right, that's a wrap. That's a wrap with me. Again, I always enjoy sharing these conversations with you. A lot of times as I'm hosting guests and I'm asking lots of questions, or as I'm teaching different ideas around sales and sales process, sometimes getting questions from other people, it helps me identify certain topics maybe I haven't covered very much or we haven't talked about very much, and just gives you a window into how I think about sales and how you might think about building out a repeatable, predictable, scalable sales process. So thanks so much for listening to the show. Again, if you haven't already gone over to salesqualia.com and either added yourself to our email list or downloaded a copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, make sure you go do that so that you can get onto the email list, and we can also send you a copy of this very great book that I'm very proud of having written and published. So that's it for now. Until the next episode. Well, I was going to say see you soon, but I guess I could say I'll listen soon, or you'll listen to us soon. I don't know. You get what I'm saying. Have a good one. See ya.